This is Sound and Vision from KEXP. Protomartyr released their sixth album called Formal Growth in the Desert in June. On their most recent tour, KEXP's Martin Douglas caught up with vocalist Joe Casey at Treefort Music Festival in Boise, Idaho. Shortly before the band performed on the festival's final night, Martin and Joe talked about their new album and Protomartyr's association with their hometown of Detroit.
You could practically hear a pin drop on the east end of downtown Boise. It was an unseasonably cold Sunday night in March, and Protomartyr helped close out the 2023 Treefort Music Festival. All of downtown was heavily marked with construction. It's a byproduct of Boise trying to shed some of its small-town stereotyping, but Idaho's capital city is still the kind of place where the streets are dead quiet at 9:45, even in the final hours of the city's biggest annual music event. There's a Shriners Hall on the west end of downtown, and as I entered it, it was packed with a few hundred people. We're all gearing up to watch Protomartyr, the proud middle-aged sons of Detroit's punk scene. In mere minutes, we will be jumping, sweating, and spilling beer all over each other. The room will be energetic, even though for some of us, it'll be deep into our fifth straight night of partying. The band will play the anthemic Male Plague, the brutally funny My Children, and a few songs from their new album, Formal Growth in the Desert, including the ominous Elimination Dances. That's how elimination dances. Fruit is not for mine. There will be lots of hugs and bright smiles and people shouting lyrics. And during the third to last song, Pontiac 87, a mosh pit will form like a tornado right in front of me. Not bad for a song about a football stadium riot after seeing the Pope. I will manage to make it to a safe spot to the far left with the protection of a massive PA speaker. Someone my age might sprain an ankle in a mosh pit. That show was the highlight of Treefort 2023 for me. Before the performance, I caught up with Protomartyr's 46-year-old frontman, vocalist Joe Casey.
What's up, Joe?
Not much. I'm glad to be here.
We spoke fondly off the record about the spiritual similarities between Detroit and my hometown of Tacoma, as well as our shared affinity for baseball. Once the red light came on and the proverbial tape started rolling, I asked Casey about the band's latest album, Formal Growth in the Desert.
Welcome to the Haunted Earth.
It's an album full of big reckonings and major shifts, both musically and lyrically. It also marks the beginning of a new era of sorts for Protomartyr upon the release of their sixth album. The band has referred to their first 5 albums as a 5-act play.
Do you feel that this new album is the first act of a new play?
I certainly hope so. That was the plan, just because the last album had such a finality to it that you have to figure out how to start anew. And I think this record kind of does it by the end. It moves from kind of being a typical down Protomartyr record. And I think by the end there's some hope, which is a new concept for us. So I hope it's the beginning of a 20-act play. Who knows? But it's nice to kind of start anew.
Longtime fans of Protomartyr will notice the difference in their newest album. The band has been gradually shifting towards the wide open spaces and instrumentation, but on Formal Growth in the Desert, the music is almost cinematic in its sense of melody, which Joe himself says is a far cry from when Protomartyr was basically a punk band. Another shift in the musical direction of the band is that Joe, the singer of Protomartyr, mostly sings here. I asked if he felt like he was a more confident singer.
No, I'm still very nervous, but because we're in these studios now, I have the time to do take after take till it forces me to try to sing a little bit better. Like if Greg and the band writes a beautiful piece of music, I can't just bark over it like I usually do. And I'm kind of tired of barking over songs, so it gives me an opportunity to try to sing a little bit or try to find some melody or add a melody of my own, whereas before I didn't do that.
The band's best songs feature lyrics of people being crushed by forces beyond their control, but there's, more often than not, a dash of gallows humor to help the despair go down smoother, and lately in their music, a sense of hope.
I don't like bands that are just uniformly dour. Like, I find it kind of hard to listen to. And, you know, I have written very depressing songs, so you try to find the humor in it, because your day-to-day life can be full of sadness, and also you could be laughing in the same day, you know. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure that I was embracing that.
3800 Tigers is a textbook example of how Protomartyr balances lightness and darkness. One half of the song serves as commentary for the world's dwindling tiger population, and the other is a potential vision of the future for his town's baseball team, the Detroit Tigers. For the past decade, Protomartyr has served as the quintessential Detroit band that's both through subject matter and reputation. We've reached a point in music history where being viewed as a regional band is somehow disrespectful, where indie music is so removed from a sense of place that a lot of playlists start to sound like one big strip mall. Protomartyr wear the distinction of being a Detroit band proudly.
I feel like Detroit's a great place, gets overlooked. It does get stereotyped or pigeonholed, but it was a benefit to us to be associated with Detroit. The music that's come out of Detroit, the people that come out of Detroit. So, you know, especially if you go to Europe, people will come and see you because they say, "Oh, Iggy Pop," you know. they will. It's a benefit to be from Detroit. It's musically especially. So, the one thing we were always worried about is we didn't want to make sure that we were trying to represent the whole of the city, because we're just a very, very tiny sliver of it. And I've got some Detroit pride. I'm very, very happy to be from it and to be a band that can represent it in a small way.
In the beginnings of Protomartyr, living in Detroit was very practical for the band.
When we started, it allowed us to have space cheap to practice in. It allowed us to have bars to play in and places to play in that were accepting of us. That has like a scene there, a music scene that's pretty accepting of new things and new sounds. People just want to have a good time, so they'll put up with anything.
And even though the city has changed, it still remains a vital community for up-and-coming bands.
I mean, it's changed since the existence of the band. The Detroit has changed quite a bit in the last decade. I will say there's tons of new bands, new and exciting bands, and they're young, and they play places that I don't even go to, because if I showed up, they'd think I was someone's dad. So that to me is exciting, that it's still, a lot of times older bands or older people like, "Oh, music was better when I was young." I don't think that's the case at all in Detroit. So I love it when I go someplace and I see a punk flyer up. I'm like, I don't recognize any of those bands, but that's a cool looking flyer. I wish I could go there, but I'll be in bed by then. But like, you know, it's exciting times, yeah.
As Protomartyr heads into their second decade as a band, Joe Casey isn't worried about who will represent their hometown when they call it a day. Detroit is in good hands, which makes the thoughtful music the veteran band does put out feel like extra credit. For Sound and Vision, I'm Martin Douglas.
Fly, he's through.
That was Sound and Vision. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, rate it, and review it. It's really helpful in allowing other people to know this podcast exists. KEXP is also a publicly funded station, which means the majority of our operating budget comes from listeners. You can help support Sound and Vision by giving a one-time $20 donation at kexp.org/sound. Thanks for listening.